Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Only Podcast. This is Chris Vanini. I'm your host, and I'm once again joined by former Spartan Sports Network producer Adam Ruff. Apologies for this podcast coming a little bit later in the week. Stuff on Wednesday night. Austin is not available tonight, and Adam was kind enough to come join us again, and there was a lot to talk about. And I know for quite a few months now, felt that the podcast has been too negative as a result of negative things going on. And let me just be upfront, this is not going to be a positive looking podcast. So, Adam, thanks for joining. How are you doing?
Of course, I'm doing great. But yeah, like you said, there's definitely a lot to talk about, and it's been a pretty brutal 2016 and 17 sports season for Michigan State so far, and doesn't look like it's getting a whole lot better right now. So we'll try to stay positive for everybody.
And we'll talk about the basketball game in a few, but I wanted to address off of the top. MSU announced today, Thursday, that 3 football players have been suspended and removed from university housing as part of an ongoing sexual assault investigation, and a staff member has also been, I believe, suspended. There are no real details on this other than a complaint being made in January. The university has its own Title IX investigation going on. There have been rumors over the last week or so about possible players. We're not going to speculate on any of that for obvious reasons. Mostly, there's not a whole lot to say because this process needs to play out. I will just say that I hope whoever needs to be held accountable for possible actions is held accountable at the end of this process. Once that process plays out, I think I will have more expansive thoughts on it. But that's kind of my only thoughts on that for right now. We have to see how this plays out. It's a very obviously serious issue, much when it comes down to sports or wins and losses, especially when you look at what's happened at other schools across the country. So, Adam, did you have anything you wanted to weigh in on that?
No, I mean, you painted the picture pretty well. I mean, you got to be careful. You got to be a responsible adult. I mean, this is, has to do with people's lives. And as we've seen in the past, when you speculate, it can drag other people down that aren't involved as well. So it's never a good thing, especially when, it's a legal process, and it's a process of dealing with, things that are wrong in this world. And so you don't take it lightly. And so by that token, you just got to let it play out, and hopefully the proper things are handled in the right way, and everything's taken care of on both sides of it. This isn't about sticking up for Michigan State. It's about sticking up for anyone who's been harmed, if someone has been harmed in a wrong way. And so it's just one of those things where you got to stay clear of it and be above it yourself and not speculate. So I definitely appreciate your words, Chris.
And I would say it at least appears to be a positive that this is action, at least sort of initiated by the school, as opposed to other situations at other schools that stuff may have gone uncovered. So although the school does have the other investigation going on with the former doctor, which I'll admit I don't know enough about that to comment on it. But again, we'll see how this plays out. As far as that's all we'll say on that for now. So before that, on Tuesday night, we had Michigan State basketball play what I thought may have been one of the worst defensive performances I've ever seen from a Michigan State team, especially in that first half. They get run out of the building at Chrysler Arena, lose by 29 points. They were down by nearly 30 at halftime. Just a complete demolition, and it came at a time when we thought that this MSU team was turning the corner. They had come off a solid enough road win at Nebraska. Nebraska's not great, but it was MSU played well, which you think is a positive for them. And then for that, they're starting to inch up toward that, pretty close to getting safe for the NCAA tournament bubble. They crash and burn in Ann Arbor. Now they're back in bubble watch territory. Lot to talk about this. Adam, just kind of your first general reactions from that pretty ugly performance.
Yeah, I mean, it was disappointing. Even leading up to the game, I mean, Tom Izzo says quite a bit that they have the best practice they've had all year, or certain players had his best practice of the year. But he talks about, he's honest in the fact that we had really good practices, and he mentioned that. So you thought, maybe guys were getting it. And I don't necessarily think this was a matter of it came down to execution. I don't think it was a matter of game plan or preparation necessarily. I think this was a mostly mental thing on both sides. I mean, on one side, Michigan, man, they just lost to Michigan State and Ohio State, and they knew they were on the bubble, and they got a couple seniors leading that team, a guy like Derek Walton. I mean, they've got all that built up equity over the years, and he had lost 5 straight. It's one of those things that was kind of a perfect storm. And when young guys don't necessarily appreciate the brevity, or maybe get in a situation where they think they're playing better, and so maybe things will start coming easier. And since they just beat this team 10 days prior, just one of those things that to me it was all mentality. And that's what it came down to. So, and I noticed it at the start. I mean, Michigan gets out to a 9-2 lead. Michigan State gets back 9-8. Michigan got ahead. It was something like 22-13 or something like that. And Michigan State got it back to 23-19 when they weren't playing well at all. They got within 4 points. So you're thinking, well, maybe they are learning a little bit. And then from that point, it was like a 32-11 run for Michigan, and they never changed their intensity. And they had plenty of chances to do that, and they never did. So, and to me, that's a maturity. That's a player leadership type of thing. So, obviously very disappointing, but maybe this could be one of those things that helps them going forward. I mean, that's the only way you can think positively about such a beating, honestly.
I mean, you kind of summed it up. You just looked at one team that you could tell was playing for its life in Michigan, and one team that maybe thought it had gotten comfortable. Because a win here would have, like I said, put them in a very good spot for the position. You put them at 15-9, 7-4 in the league. You're looking pretty good. And oh man, they just did not bring it at all. Turnovers were a mess. I mean, if you can point to one thing, what was that? And actually, I'm going to put my headset down for a quick sec. I got a puppy barking in the background. I got to go tell him to be quiet. Sorry.
Yeah.
What was your biggest? I guess if you could point to one biggest problem, what would you say it was?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt, like you said, Chris, it was definitely the turnovers. I mean, 21 turnovers. I mean, it's just one of those inexcusable things. I just can't imagine you could ever win a basketball game with 21 turnovers. And when you look at it, I guess this isn't surprising, but 14 of those turnovers came from the freshmen. I mean, think about that. Michigan State has freshmen that play enough to commit 14 total turnovers in one game. Miles Bridges had 5 turnovers. Ward had 2. Langford only had 1, but then you look at, as we all know, Cassius Winston, man, he struggled. Just 19 minutes of playing time, he had 6 turnovers. So between Bridges and Winston, there's 11 turnovers right there with 2 guys. So when 4 of your guys, 4 freshmen, have 14 turnovers in a game, I mean,
yeah,
there's nothing you can do. And then not only that, but then the way it was converted by Michigan. I mean, they took care of business on those turnovers every single time. They scored 30 points. So when you look at the fact that Michigan State lost by 29,
30 points off turnovers, yeah, and they were only 6 fast break points too. So it wasn't like turnover for touchdown type of deal. It was basically MSU just wasting a chance, and then Michigan taking advantage of every single chance.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. They wasted a chance, they screwed up, they got down about it, and then they let it affect their defense type of thing. So that's why I say it was mentality the whole time. I mean, you saw Cassius Winston; he wasn't even protecting the basketball much. I mean, Walton was up on him, and Walton, give him credit, the guy was wreaking havoc. And they were pressuring the wing players on those first initial passes, but they weren't protecting the basketball. They weren't valuing it whatsoever. And so, and to me, that is mentality. That doesn't have to do with preparation a lot. That's mentality. They're going to come out and hit you in the mouth. How are you going to respond? And they didn't respond.
Yeah, I looked at, I kind of along those lines look at leadership and specifically how it comes out of the point guard position. Like you said, Winston, 6 turnovers, 3 points. He hit 1 3-pointer. Nairn, just 3 points in 30 minutes. He had 0 assists, along with 0. He had no turnovers, but no assists. So just they got – and they even put a Nairn-Winston lineup out there in the second half because Izzo was putting out just anything he thought of. No one there to calm him down, no one there to take over. Bridges, does what he can, but yeah, it was, when Michigan's at its best, it's a pretty good team, and we saw that when they blew out Indiana a couple weeks ago. And when MSU is at its worst, it's really bad. And Michigan's got a high ceiling, MSU's got a low floor, and I think that's kind of what we saw there. MSU playing its absolute worst, Michigan playing perhaps its best. They shot 75% in the first half. I mean, man.
They were 20 of 27. I've never. I mean,
that included 10 for. They were
8 for 11.
13 for 17 on 8 for 11 on threes. Just they couldn't miss. I mean, and they had some open looks in the first game in East Lansing that they just missed, and so I mean the turnovers come down to everything. Izzo, I thought it was interesting what Izzo said after the game. He said the turnovers are on me. Don't rip the. I mean, turnovers are specifically on the guys. That's not like. That's guys like
he's protecting his own players.
Right. That's what I was gonna say. That came down to him protecting his guys, and when he's not happy, he rips into his guys. We know that. When he thinks they need to get a message. When he thinks they're hurting and when he thinks him yelling at them is not going to do anything, he goes into this publicly protecting them mode. And I think that's what he did. I mean, they weren't just the offense, like 4 shot clock violations in the opening few minutes. They were slow to get the offense moving, which you could put part of that on Izzo, I think. But they weren't setting screens well. They weren't positioning well. They weren't getting, cutting hard and getting ready for passes, and then the passes themselves were bad. And Michigan did play some pretty good defense too, certainly. But just a complete mess. And this MSU team is so weird because MSU shot 48% for the game. That's not bad. I mean, it's decent. And offensively as a team, are in the top 35 in 3-point shooting and the top 50 in 2-point shooting. It's a decent shooting team, number 29 in effective field goal percentage. The problem is they're number 309th in turnovers. So it's a good offense when it's not completely ugly. The problem is when when it gets ugly like it did in that one. Because in the Nebraska game they only had 15 turnovers in that one too. There's a problem there. They shot 55% in the Nebraska game. So when they don't turn it over, the offense is decent. The problem is they just give away so many free possessions. And
and to me, Chris, I think a lot of it, and again, this isn't an excuse, it's just the way it is. It's the youth and inexperience, even among their veterans. I mean, the veterans don't have the proper experience either. And so the cohesion on a team isn't necessarily good, and you need to have that cohesion. And when your leader is Tum Tum, and there's nothing wrong with him as a person or anything like that, but when your leader is a guy who can't necessarily do the things that you want a leader to do on the floor in terms of being able to score when things break down, or it's harder for him to talk to guys or yell at guys when he's not able to affect the game the way maybe he wishes he could.
And you know, and you know who was a difference maker in the first game was Winston. And you know, Nairn played 30 minutes, which is I think more than he has been because Izzo had to play him because Winston was a huge liability out there. And Nairn wasn't a liability in the sense of turning the ball over, but he's liability in the sense that he's not an offensive threat.
And that's part of the reason Michigan can play such tight defense on everybody else. Because if you notice at the start of the game and when all those shot clock violations were occurring, it was almost as if those young players like Langford and Bridges, they didn't move a whole lot because they were guarded so tightly, so far away from the basket, and they're going, do I really start the play out here? And there was so much standing around because of what Michigan was doing. And so Nairn it seemed like the play was starting so late. But, I mean, whoever's playing point has to do a better job of, one, protecting the basketball, and two, of, yelling, go. We started the play. You've got to go. Getting set up in the offense. And because if they're not going to do it, and to me that was just as much of a problem, them not actually running the offense because of the way Michigan was playing, affecting them so much. And then they weren't used to it. And that happens when there's, inexperience and a lot of youth. I mean, I thought Miles Bridges might have played his worst game as a Spartan, all things considered. I mean, he scored some, but he wasn't real active. In the ways we see him active. And the thing to me is, I think his teammates view him as a leader. And the reason I say that is because he's the best player on the team. And so they look to him. And when he isn't at his best, the team isn't. And we've seen this before. And it was evidenced with his 5 turnovers. He was sloppy with the ball, like everyone else was.
There were a couple instances where he allowed a 3 in his face, and he didn't put a hand up.
Yeah, and that was the next thing I was going to say. There were numerous times where he kind of jogged out to the 3-point line and then didn't even put his hand up. And he's the most athletic guy on the team, where he's a guy who would be able to possibly affect the shot like that, and he's not even putting his hand up. So I just think it's just a combination of things, but mostly youth and inexperience, which, you're late in the season, but a lot of these guys shouldn't be playing the minutes they are because there's a reason, even though they're upperclassmen, they don't have as much experience. So, I mean, just all of those things, it was a perfect storm, as Coach D'Antonio says.
So another player I want to ask you about is Joshua Langford. He played 16 minutes. He had 1 turnover, 1 foul. That was it. He comes into the game leading MSU in 3-point shooting at 46%. But I feel like it's hard to figure out what his role is. He's a very low usage player in terms of how much he affects the game when he's in there. He can shoot a mid-range, but he hasn't really shown much ball handling, much driving. He came in highly as a highly rated recruit,
top 20. Yep.
just like Ward and Bridges did, and Ward and Bridges have played like it, but Langford just seems like kind of he's in a weird spot. He's not really a shooting guard, but maybe he is. He kind of seems like he's in. It's kind of hard to see where he fits. What are your thoughts on what you've seen from him this year? Yeah,
I mean, he is another one of those guys you just don't know what you're going to get out of him. And to me, it's his mentality. He doesn't have Miles, most games, and Nick Ward have kind of a bulldog mentality. Give me the ball, I'm going to score. Or, come at me, I'll come at you type of guy. And Langford is kind of a standoffish. He's seems like a complete team guy, and he needs to be more selfish because he can't shoot. I don't think, a lot of the set plays are necessarily run for him. It's either getting the ball down to Ward or getting Bridges the ball or having Harris coming off screens. And so Langford, I think, because may not be a first option, his mentality's fallen back into that role of, okay, I'm just kind of going to do what I'm supposed to do, and that's it. But when you have that type of mentality, it affects your game all over the place.
It may be one of those situations where, if MSU had more depth, maybe he wouldn't be relied upon as much, and meaning he wouldn't play much at all, or even maybe redshirt. But or maybe coming in as a top-rated guy, trying to figure out how to be a role player. I don't know. I just feel like his game in general, at least from what I've seen in college, I didn't watch him in high school, so I can't speak too much of that. But just based on what I've seen, he has just seemed very not comfortable out there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and the thing is, I mean, Tom Izzo's like, hey, he's a Charlie Bell type player. And when you hear that, you go, oh, man, he's going to rebound. He's going to be a lockdown defender. He's going to hit open shots. And he really is a Charlie Bell type of player when you watch him. But, again, I think he's kind of lost right now. And this happens to some freshmen. I mean, I think fans get caught up in seeing, Kentucky every year. They've got 3 freshmen that are really good. And, oh, wow, Tom Izzo just got his, most highly ranked recruiting class in his, 2+ decades. And so these guys are going to be incredible this year because, look, Kentucky does it. We will too. But the problem is out of top 50 guys, usually there's only probably, between 8 and 10 in the nation out of those top 50 guys who are real impact players. And Kentucky has, almost half of them on one team. So that leaves, Duke with a couple and then 3 or 4 or 5 other guys for the rest of the country. And Michigan State has one this year in Miles Bridges and kind of 2 with Nick Ward, just not as consistently. So I think Josh kind of seems like he's lost a little bit and he's been just looking for himself. He's not very aggressive. I mean, I watched him in Moneyball this year, and again, that's not, a good, accurate assessment of what a player is because there's 0 defense played. But he was attacking all the time. I mean, he had a great game, and he's got a great body at 6'4", and he's incredibly strong. He's got a very mature body for a young kid. And so, I think maybe the injury he had in the preseason slowed him down a little bit when maybe he was rolling because Tom Izzo was speaking very, very highly of him going into those exhibition games, and then he had a hamstring problem. And so he lost his spot a little bit and had to get it back. And to me, it all kind of started there. It could have started there where he kind of lost his place.
And hamstring is.
And he just doesn't have the mentality maybe that the other guys do to really fight back from him. I think in a couple of years he's going to be a really good player, and maybe even next year. But I mean, he's going to have to find, figure out his role and go hard at it. And just live with it. I mean, because he's got all the tools, really, and he should be a good rebounding guard.
Yeah, you see you see the pieces on the team, and you think, next year it could be a pretty good team once everybody kind of figures it out. But MSU's still got this year. I mean, if for whatever reason Miles Bridges happened to come back next year, I think this would be maybe a national championship contending team, but I think that's unlikely. But this year, the only goal is, I think, for them realistically, is to get to the NCAA tournament and keep that streak going. I think they've made it 19 years in a row, and
yep.
Izzo often will every time Selection Sunday comes around and MSU gets in, Izzo always says the streak is one of the most important things to him, and as impressive as anything he thinks that they've done. And that's in jeopardy. They are at 14-10, 6-5 in the Big Ten. They dropped 8 spots in KenPom just by that one game alone, down to 57. They're not good in the RPI. They don't have many good wins. Wichita State is their only top 20 win. They have several wins from teams in the 30s, like Minnesota twice, Northwestern, and Michigan. But this is a team that hasn't beaten a very good team yet, and they have one bad loss to Northeastern. The Penn State one was, make of it what you will. But they finished with Iowa and Ohio State are the next 2 at home, followed by at Purdue, home against Nebraska, home against Wisconsin, at Illinois, at Maryland. So I think 19 wins guarantees that they're in, because it's a weak bubble this year. Joe Lunardi has been high on MSU for quite a while here, even as they've lost 5 of 8 games here. He still has them not even in his last 4 in or something like that. I don't know if that's just faith that MSU will turn it around or what, but I think now at this point it's fair to say that Iowa and Ohio State, these next 2 games at home, are must-wins. And I say that because they have not proven they have the ability to beat a superior team, a team that is superior to them. They haven't, whether that's a Purdue, and they have Purdue, Wisconsin, and Maryland still to play, and those 3 teams I think are vastly superior to this MSU team. So you take away those 3 games, you got Iowa, Ohio State, Nebraska, and Illinois. If you win all 4 of those, you're at 18 wins, needing a win in the Big Ten tournament to get you to 19. Where do you think they sit? I know we're not bracketologists, but what is your feeling on the chances of this team possibly missing the tournament?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still not, I don't know, I guess sold that they'll miss it. I mean, they're going to have to, if they've got to get to the 18 win mark in the regular season at least. And so
if they don't, that means they would have 1, 2. I mean, if they don't, that means unless they win the big tournament, they will end the season with 15 losses, which I think Spartan Dan said would be the most ever for a tournament team.
Yeah, it could be. I haven't looked into that at all, but yeah, I mean, you've all the home games, the next 3 home games are must win, and that one at Illinois, like you mentioned. I think Michigan State's gonna have some kind of chance against Wisconsin. I know it sounds crazy, but isn't every Wisconsin game pretty much close? And
yeah, but MSU's usually a better team.
No, I'm not saying every Michigan State Wisconsin game. I'm saying every Wisconsin game this season. Wisconsin isn't blowing everybody out, and I'm definitely not sold on their number 7 ranking either.
I mean, they beat Rutgers by 7, beat in overtime. They went to overtime with Rutgers. Overtime, beat Michigan by 4, beat Indiana by 5, lost to Purdue. I mean, it's possible. It just was the Badgers have won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in a row. They seem to be kind of hitting their stride.
Yeah, they are. But I mean, if there's one game on the schedule where Michigan State maybe can finally get a win, that's one you don't think they have a shot at between Purdue, Wisconsin, and Maryland. I would think that Wisconsin game is going to be the one, the last home game of the season.
Right. The fact that it's at home, I think, is the big factor.
So, I mean, if you're coming off a win against Nebraska, and then you got that Sunday game, and you've potentially won 3 of your last 4, and but maybe feeling good isn't necessarily good for this team either, like we saw against Michigan. So, it's hard to say, but I think that's the one game that maybe could kind of change their fortunes a little bit for sure, and get them to the 19 wins. But yeah, I don't see them winning either at Purdue or at Maryland. So you definitely got to win the Iowa, Ohio State, Nebraska, and Illinois games for sure. And then and the way the Big Ten is right now, it would if they finish 10-8 in the conference, well, then all of a sudden they could end up playing on Friday for some reason because they're a 4 seed. I mean, because after those top 3, it's a mess.
You almost wonder if ending up on a Thursday. So I mean, with how jumbled it is, a game or 2 really shifts where we are in the standings. I almost wonder if they happen to play on a Thursday, gets them an extra opportunity to win might be beneficial.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Play on a Thursday, and maybe you get you probably won't get Rutgers, but you get another team that will still cause some problems for them, but a lot easier to get a win. And you never know; it could feel good, and you get 1 win, you get 2, because typically those teams that play Friday struggle out of the gate in that first game after the other teams have already played. So you never know how it's going to go. So you just got to, get all the wins you can in the regular season. So I think Saturday's game against Iowa is really going to kind of tell us what we really need to know about their chances of making the tournament. Because if they lose at Iowa, or against Iowa, you don't know how their psyche is going to be. And you also don't know how they're going to bounce back from getting crushed by their rival, because they are young. And so you don't know how they handle that kind of thing yet. So
I wondered that at halftime. I was wondering if it was going to turn into such a blowout that it would just destroy the foundation of their psyche. I think that they played even enough in the second half to stave that off, but still it was an ugly, ugly loss by the final score. If they lose by the next time we podcast, they will have played Iowa on Saturday and Ohio State on Tuesday. If they lose either one of those games, I think they're in big trouble.
Yeah, that's when I think we talk about, oh no, this could really be happening.
Yeah, I still lean that they'll get in, but it's getting real, real close.
Yeah,
And
there's no doubt about it.
And it's very much it'll be a pretty tough road to get there. Ken Pom has them at the number 18 schedule. I think they're aided by the fact that they played a difficult schedule, even though they lost all of those games against good teams. They didn't win any of them. They're aided by the fact that they're a brand name. I think that'll be objective or not, I think that could play a factor down if it comes down to them at the very end, if they're right in the mix there. So they have some tiebreakers or whatever, but they need to – that doesn't come into play because if they miss out on the tournament, it's a bad. This team it's not been as good as people thought it was for a variety of reasons. The biggest, honestly, I believe, is the fact that they have no centers, barely any power forwards, with Gavin Schilling and Ben Carter out, and it's been a complete struggle on the boards all year. They've been an average to not good rebounding team, which is kind of what Izzo's always built it on. They haven't been good. Ironically, they've actually been decent on 2-point defense and blocks. They've actually been well defensively on the inside. Outside, their perimeter defense has been a mess, and that comes down to effort. That's not skill. Perimeter, it was a complete disaster against Michigan again. How they move side to side in the court, how they call out when there's screens and switches. MSU defense switches all the time, and when you have a young and inexperienced team, they haven't grown into it. And at this point, you can't say they're going to. They are what they are. So a lot of questions as for the games. Ken Pom has MSU winning against Iowa 77-72, giving MSU a 70% chance of winning. And as for Ohio State, they have MSU winning 71-67, with a 66% chance. But every single Ohio State game comes down to the final possessions every single time with this Armada. It's kind of what I would expect again. So for those two, do you think they get the wins in both?
I think they do get the wins in both because they have played, at home when Miles Bridges is playing, they've played so much better. The effort, and when this team plays with effort, the effort you want to see, they play well. That's why I always say the mentality of the team is important, because when they play with that effort they need, they play well. So I think they'll win both games this week. But Iowa, man, they're a weird team, just like Michigan State's kind of a weird team this year. But it's different for Michigan State because Michigan State's obviously one of the class teams of the Big Ten. Iowa's not. But Iowa's definitely got some talent. It's going to make it tough. And ironically, we talk about the freshmen and inexperience from Michigan State. Iowa's got a couple freshmen, true freshmen that are pretty good for that team. Iowa.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Iowa is 344th in the nation in experience.
I didn't know it was that bad, but I mean, Cordell Pemsel, the forward, he's not starting right now, but the kid can rebound. He's leading the league in field goal percentage at 63%. So when he gets down low, he scores. And then Jordan Bohannon, I mean, we know his brother from Wisconsin, and he's one of four boys in that Bohannon family who's played Division I college basketball. And
I was going to say, it feels like there's a million of them.
Yeah, and hey, I mean, the kid's already shown he's a good player. He's scored in double figures 4 straight games. He's a good assist man. He's hit 15 of his last 29 3-pointers in the last 4 games, and so he's going to create problems for Michigan State. And I mean, they've got some active guys that are bigger. Tyler Cook 6'9", Ahmad Wagner 6'7". I already mentioned Pemsel. Nicholas Baer, he's kind of a lanky, do everything. He's their leading rebounder, and he's off the bench at 6'7". Dom Ewell actually caused problems as a freshman for Michigan State. He's 6'9", so they've got some size.
Mm-hmm.
And as we know, size can affect Michigan State, so you never know what can really happen. So I do think that it's just going to come down to the energy that Michigan State gets when they play at home in both of these games. So I do think they will win.
Yeah, in terms of usage, team, they've got Peter Jok is their top guy, senior. After him, it's freshman, sophomore. Yeah, they're kind of like Nebraska in that Nebraska was a very young team. Iowa is pretty good offensively. They're not great in any one thing, but they're overall pretty solid, and they're kind of average in defense, but they do give up a lot of offensive rebounds. So that'll be an interesting matchup, as you mentioned, the height there. And
they're allowing 80 points a game.
Well, part of that is
Big Ten play too. So
part of that
is last.
They have in Big Ten play. They're the #1 tempo, although they're number 9 in adjusted defensive efficiency. Yeah, the defense has not been as good in Big Ten play as it was in non-conference. They're actually dead last in defensive rebounding in the Big Ten, but they're the #1 tempo. They like to play up in Big Ten play. So that'll be another interesting factor because MSU's. I guess MSU's been okay in the half court, or I mean in the fast break. They've sort of gotten better at it as the year has gone on, but at times the half court looks real bad. So up and down. So we'll see on that. So that's where Iowa is. Ohio State, MSU just played them. That was a team that really shut down Nick Ward in the 7-footer, really handled him inside. I'd be curious to see what MSU does differently this time around on them. They're above average on both ends of the court. Looks like, and although the defense has struggled in Big Ten play, they've won 2 in a row after losing a stretch there. 2 close ones. They win at Michigan, dominated the Wolverines on the glass, just grabbed everything, and then they had a narrow win against Rutgers. They play Maryland on Saturday, so they'll be playing. MSU will be their second straight road game. And what do you know? MSU Ohio State is on Valentine's Day again. I feel like they always play on Valentine's Day or something.
Well, was that 2 years ago when Denzel hit that 3-pointer there to win the game on Valentine's Day?
Yeah, let me see if they did.
70-67 or something like that, if I recall.
Yeah, last year they did not play. Oh no, last year they played 3 times in 5 games at the end of the year. That's what it was. So I mean, I guess since MSU's at home, I'll pick MSU to win 2 narrow ones, and they can start to feel a little bit more comfortable going to Purdue. But if they lose either one of those games, they are in trouble.
I will say, and I don't know if this is accurate and how I should say it. I kind of think who guards Peter Jok on Saturday is the X factor in the game, because Jok is 6'6". He's got a quick release, and you go because of Michigan State's size. Who guards him? Really? I mean, is it Langford starting out on him at 6'5"? But he hasn't. No one's really played great perimeter defense.
No,
is it Bridges? I can't imagine, just because he's got to help with some of the bigger players.
Yeah.
So, and then off the bench, is it Matt McQuaid? I don't really know. I think that's going to be interesting. Will he get the 6 eyes treatment? I don't think you can trust all the youth and experience to do that type of thing like he normally does with an opponent's score. I mean, Peter Jok's a pretty dynamic player at 21 points a game, and he gets to the free throw line a little bit, and he doesn't miss there. I think I saw he's missed 8 free throws all year, and I think he shot something like 111 of them. So, I mean, he's going to be tough, and so I think whoever the X factor in the game will be whoever is tasked with guarding him, whichever 2 or 3 guys, because that's going to be very, very important for this team at a spot where it's very difficult for Michigan State to guard.
Yeah, so that's where that is with hoops. We'll see where they are in a week 2. I think must wins basically coming up here. We're going to wrap up with a little bit more football. It was announced earlier in the week that offensive lineman, I think Theo Lacusa, quit the team. Basically said he kind of hadn't felt passion playing the game for a while, and if that's the case, it's understandable. I'm sure it was a tough decision and everything like that, and hope he finds whatever he's passionate about. But in terms of how this affects the team on the field, it puts them in another hole. He was probably going to be the starting right tackle next year on an offensive line that's already thin and inexperienced. You figure now it looks like the offensive line will be Brian Allen, Tyler Higbee, David Beadle, and probably Cole Chewins, who look good at times. You see if Dennis Finley is back. He was going to be your right tackle.
Right.
I think the right tackle, but he hasn't. He's going to be a senior now. He suffered that broken leg in 2015 and still hasn't really been able to come back since then. Then there's some guys who redshirted last year, like Curry and Luke Campbell, and then they signed 4 offensive linemen last week. But if you're playing true freshman offensive linemen, that means you're in trouble. And they were just destroyed in the trenches this year, and this is a pretty, I think, big loss in terms of how they're going to be on the field. And, since it's the only colors, back 5 years ago, I copied off of Blackheart Gold Pants and created the angry MSU offensive lineman hating God, who would strike down on the line with career-ending injury after career-ending injury, then in-season injuries, and just that stretch of years where MSU could not get anything on the line. And then it went away in 2013 and 2014. Then it came back in 2015 as guys got injured throughout the year. And then 2016 and 2017, and they are just big holes at the line there. Any thoughts on the offensive line right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's devastating. I mean, just you lose Jack Conklin, Jack Allen, others, and then all of a sudden you got all this inexperience again. I mean, it's like the offensive linemen for Michigan State are akin to the post players for the basketball team. I mean, if you don't have them, you can't do the core things that you need to do to win. Yeah. I mean, you win in the trenches in football, and Michigan State wins with defensive and rebounding in basketball. And it's non-existent because of injuries and defections between Lacusa and Jack Conklin leaving early. Previous year, it's not good. I mean, and really the hope for Michigan State is that guys grow up fast. I mean, Cole Chewins got some experience there. Tyler Higbee got a little bit before he was injured. It's not a good thing because these guys, I mean, the last couple of years of the injuries, they haven't been just playing tackle or just guard. They've been playing every position out there. I mean, Brian Allen seemed like he played every position. And you can't ever, no matter how many linemen you have. They're already always playing different spots.
That's what I was
because
going to
of
say.
injuries. You can't get the cohesion, which you need to have. I know when I was covering the team for 8 years, the lineman always said you're at your best when you're in your position all the time, and the 5 guys can act like one person. And when you're always switching, always flipping guys in and out because of injuries or trying to find guys who can play, it's just going to be a struggle. That's the way it is. And I don't see how it's going to be any different unless the guys who start at the start of the year, whoever they are the guys for the entire season and can build some cohesion. I just don't know.
And you know, you mentioned along those lines with guys playing different positions. In terms of what they brought in the recruiting class, they brought in some linemen, but they did not really bring in many tackles. And that's been a problem kind of all throughout the D'Antonio era, is that they have a lot of guards playing tackle. And you have guys who are shorter on the outside, shorter arms, don't move as well. You look at, I think a lot of Dan France, I think was an inside guy who went outside.
Yep.
The Allens, they kind of moved them all around. Other than, I mean, Jack Conklin, when they got him, he was a tall guy, very much underweight. And he gained the weight and he turned into an all-pro player in his first year in the NFL. They have not had a lot of that. They do not bring in many tall offensive linemen and guys who can play tackle. And losing a guy like Lakusa, a guy who was going to be your starting right tackle, he was at 6'5". You know, there's not a lot of guys. I think they've struggled on the outside in terms of developing linemen because, like you said, they're moving guys to all different positions. And being able to cross-train guys is good for situational football, I think, for emergency situations. I don't know if you want to really have everybody playing different spots throughout the game. I mean, one of the reasons the 2013 and 2014 lines were so good, they rotated guys in and out. They went 8 guys deep, but they weren't drive to drive, moving inside and outside and right to left and that kind of stuff. And they have a shortage of, I think, talented bodies on the line, and losing definitely adds to that. And on a season heading into it, regardless of what's going on off the field right now, going into a season where we have all sorts of questions about their play on the field, to have a lot of questions at the offensive line is not a great place to be in. Also, spring football is starting much earlier for them this year, and the spring game will be on April 1st. Normally, MSU is one of the last schools to do its spring game, usually toward the end of April. I'm guessing the fact that they didn't have any bowl practices this time around is a factor in terms of moving it up. So take note of that if you're interested in going to
that. And I know when I was working closely with them, the Big Ten Network was a big deal as well. So I don't know what the schedule is like. It could also have to do with making sure the game is live on the Big Ten Network as well. I don't know if that's the case this year, but I know it's been a case in the past when moving it back helped because Ohio State and Michigan's of the world were done.
Yeah.
And so because Michigan State was a better program, they got more ratings, they would get on. So I don't know if that was a factor to get on live as well. And I don't know if it will be on live. I'm not sure. Well, I think it did say in the press release that it would be live on the Big Ten Network. But I think that possibly could have played a factor in an earlier camp as well.
And I've talked to coaches who have moved spring practice up. Like, you had some places that start early February. And a lot of them like to say that it continues the momentum of the end of last season. You know, the team plays through the bowl game, and then they get to winter workouts, and then you get spring ball, and then you take the rest after spring. That's obviously not the case with MSU because they didn't have a bowl game. So I'm wondering how much of a role that played into that. So anything else you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, not with football, man. I mean, you talk about the offensive line and everything that's going on, man. the cohesion, I don't want to say, but we could see more of the same offensively again next year. New quarterback, all the offensive line switching around. It's just one of those things. Two starting receivers gone, Medeiros and Shelton. It's one of those things. The talent's got to rise to the top, and leaders really have to take their places. If there are strong leaders on the team, they have to take their places early and make their presence felt for you to have a chance when you have all these other issues. So if they can somehow get strong leadership, that'll help them. Otherwise, it's hard to trying to be positive, but it's not always easy, especially coming off of last season. And it appears from the outside, at least initially, that there could be more of the same just because of the attrition and injuries on offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, the program it's in a dangerous place right now, and depending on what happens with this sexual assault investigation, which I find interesting because, if only for the timing, because I was at the AFCA coaches convention in early January, and D'Antonio spoke as part of a forum about discipline, and he said the worst thing a coach can hear is that your team is not disciplined, and he said that MSU was not disciplined last year, and that fell upon everybody. But he also thought it was something you can get back quickly. And depending on what happens with this investigation, that may not be the case. So we will see what happens with that as it plays out. Not going to speculate on anything. I would recommend that MSU listeners also not speculate on anything, also not react to any trolling by other people, because never good to that kind of stuff's not rivalry fodder. It's just serious stuff. So we'll see how that plays out. MSU basketball has some must wins, and we will talk to you guys next week. Thank you guys for listening. And I'm on Twitter at Chris Giannini. He's at Adam Ruff Photo, right?
That's correct. You got it.
Make sure you're checking theolacolors.com. Always great stuff on the site. Thanks everybody for listening, for reading, and everything. And we'll see you later.